big welcome to the Women Leading Show. It is fantastic to have you back in the 2021 series of the Women Leading Show. We had an epic year last year, an incredible amount of amazing shows, finished off with a lovely Christmas show where we talked about the women who led us through 2020, and a lovely segue into my guest today. So I'm Jo Baldwin Trott, the editor of the Women Leading book. Here it is. And I am very thrilled to have with me an author who is from America, because the very last person who I chipped in with the leading woman of 2020 for me was Kamala Harris. Anyway, a very big welcome to Dr. Alessandra Wall from America too.
It is, and even the same state, right?
So even the same state, yeah.
It is very nice to spend some time with you today.
Oh, you too. Hopefully Alessandra and I are going to write our own book one day, but I won't badger her with that now, because I know she's started her year off at warp speed, as have I. But yeah, so let's start with something really topical before we come on to your wonderful chapter in the book. But what's going on? How's it all feeling for you right now, where you are, and let's talk a little bit about Kamala Harris if we can.
Oh, well, I want to start with the side, just asking that question, what's going on? So much personally, what's going on is Life in Focus Coaching is doing very well, continuing to work on supporting women who are trying to build careers that their careers are already successful, but are also satisfying. And the goal for this year is really to engage organizations and companies more in figuring out how to help these women do this instead of putting all the work in the women's camp. So more consulting, more training, more speaking. And as you said, warp speed, both you and I were talking about this before the show. There is so much on our plates. I think we're very typical as women in how we approach this. Big dreams, big ambitions. This is a word I'm using a lot in 2021. I had to catch myself, 2021, the word ambition, because it's such a dirty word for women. So I'm putting it in my mouth and out into the world, and I'm encouraging the women I work with to talk about their big ambitions. My goal for this year is to approach life undaunted, which is also something that I know ties into what we'll talk about with the chapter, right? To just not allow yourself to feel intimidated or cower in front of roadblocks, the scope of your ambitions, the pushback that you get. And it's going to be a lot of wonderful work. How that ties into the way the year has started on a number of other levels, from politics to getting vaccines to transitions of power, it's mayhem. With a promise. I keep on talking. I was talking with a client the other day. I think a lot of people are feeling a little bit more depressed this start of year. There was a lot of hope about, the new year coming and the vaccine coming and things that would change. I'm curious whether it's the same thing in Europe and in the UK, but it's just more of the same. So I hear people saying there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I say, the thing with the tunnel is you thought it was a straight line, and it's this bend. And so it's much longer than you thought it was. So there is an end, there is light, but there's a longer way to go to get there. And I think people are really feeling that this year.
Yeah, well, it's been a long journey, hasn't it? It really, really has, and much longer than we felt. Although, I'll be really honest with you, I wish I'd put some money on my predictions of what would happen, because I did predict all that's happened, and the second phase and everything else. It just seemed to me as common sense that this would sadly be the path. But I didn't want to wish it on any of us, really. But let me just let everyone know. Thank you for listening and watching. But Dr. Alessandra Wall is a licensed clinical psychologist and leadership coach who specialises in helping women who are leading and helping them with their careers, and to really succeed and really go, like you said, go for the goals. And obviously Kamala Harris, if we just, start with someone like her, personally, I just think what an exciting time for the US. You have this woman who's, suddenly just in the limelight for quite a few of us, and that slightly includes me. But what an inspiration for someone who is being, I feel, just so authentic. She's really shown up. And that's something that I know we're both very passionate about, is that we always completely show up as ourselves. So tell me what your thoughts are on that right
now. I'm hesitating because the truth is I'm a very cynical person. I'm very jaded, but I'm not. I'm also really hopeful. So I share your hopefulness. I certainly share on the excitement. It is a momentous period for America, and that's where that's where my jaded side kicks in, because it is baffling to me that in the 21st century, having a female be placed in a position of relative power, I mean, so vice president for America, is so like extraordinary that we have to celebrate it at this level, right? Like I celebrate it, of course, and she's going to open the door and she's going to help little girls and young women see that there are opportunities and possibilities, and that is wonderful. But the fact that we're still at a place in history where that is the case is so demoralizing in some ways. But we're going to change that, right? That's what the book is about. When people ask me what my mission is, you know, the value I might add to the people I work with is to help them build these really satisfying careers so that their success comes on their own term. But my mission is to make sure that when women access these higher levels of leadership and power and success, whether it's becoming a CEO or a mayor or a vice president or a president or a top athlete, that it stops being unusual or extraordinary, that it is so common that we can just talk about the person instead of having to highlight that they are a woman or a woman of color or a woman with a different background. So we'll get there, right? So this is where it starts, but it's so frustrating that we are still in this place where it is such a momentous thing. So I'm excited for her. She's got a long battle to fight. We know this as women in leadership, that we are scrutinized far more closely and critically than men, by women and men. So I don't want to create a divide here in that sense. By women and men, we do this to each other too. And I will try to support, you know, what she represents as much as possible, because she is going to be picked apart by the media, by her peers, by lay people, right and left for the next 4 years.
Yeah. I mean, that is depressing, and it's not great to hear, but sadly it's true. And yeah, I think so. I think you know this. I volunteer for a women's group for. I mentor parliamentarian potential candidates, so women that want to become our future MPs in the UK. And the one thing that really comes up that I really is a bit of a drum I'm banging right now, is that we all stick up for we stand up and we get involved when there is this aggression or negativity, you know, and I think that's really, really important, that when we see it, we also, you know, and I think that's part of the diffusion and the dilution of the negativity, is when so many people say such a stupid comment, that's ridiculous, you know, just if it's of a low level. But you know, resilience is a word you mentioned earlier before we came on live, and I think resilience is a word that we don't really use enough, and I really hope it's going to come up in the next Women Leading book as a real focus point. I think I've got an author who's going to write about it, because it's a very important factor to being a leading woman. And also, sadly, as you've already highlighted, we do need extra resilience. It just is, right?
That is really important. There are 2 points you made that really hit home for me. One is going to the most recent one. It is just what it is. And we can sit here and wish that things were different, and I can be jaded and frustrated by the way things are and continue complaining about it. Or we can look at things and say, it is what it is. I don't want this to be the reality 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now. So the question is, because I can't control anybody else, because individually I don't have the power to change the system, what can I do to change my little microcosm of this system? How can I show up differently? How can I make sure that the things that I am doing actually are representative of the values I say I espouse? And which brings me to the second thing you were talking about, which is speaking up and standing up for one another. I teach allyship, and oftentimes I'll teach allyship to mixed groups, but sometimes they'll be to groups just of women. And the expectation is very often that I'm going to talk about how to get men to be our allies, or that in those mixed, those co-ed groups, that I will be turning toward the men and really educating them on how to be allies. And I always surprise the women because I turn on them. And we'll talk about labels and bias that they experience, and they'll look at them and I'll say, okay, I want you to stop. And I want you to think about, who are you doing this to? Because what's more dreadful than receiving this from somebody else is receiving it from somebody who should understand, who should know better, right? Who complains about it and experiences it. And you will see that moment of reckoning, and then very quickly, often you'll see people shut down. Well, I'm not that way. I don't do that. And I'm like, of course we do. You can just start with the last time you said something disparaging about an actress. Right? It's simple, it's small. There's no real victim, I guess, because she's not going to be hearing you say whatever you said about the way she showed up or her attitude on an interview. But the truth is, that is within you. And if you're saying it about said actress or reality TV show person, you're probably saying it about somebody you work alongside. And if we can stop and become more self-aware, then we have, and we can practice that self-awareness. And this goes back to something that I talk about in that first chapter I wrote to Women Leading, right? We create opportunity. We create an opportunity for change, but that self-awareness, that insight and that self-awareness alone really are not going to create change. So all of us know that we have bias, and I can practice noticing when my biases show up. And now I have an opportunity to make a difference. I have an opportunity to change the system I say I despise and I dislike, the system that makes it so that having a female vice president in 2021 is a historic moment for America, which is crazy, right? The most important thing is then to follow that up with action. What am I going to do? Am I going to catch myself and censor myself? Am I going to acknowledge the bias I just demonstrated? Am I going to choose to approach somebody differently and apologize? Or change the way I interact with them? And in creating that change in my space, now I can create a wider change in the world.
Yeah, because it's contagious, right? You know, if you're demonstrating that, especially as a leader, but anyway, if you're just demonstrating that you're taking a moment and you are considerate, and it is, mindfulness is such a word that we've banded about, and it's been sort of pulled apart and put about, but it is actually mindfulness for me. I just feel like it's taking a moment to stop and be mindful of what you're about to say and where it's coming from as well. Where in your body the information is coming from. Is it coming from your head? Is it coming from your heart? Is it coming from your soul? And that's, that spiritual connection is very much part of my work as a mentor. But I think that's part of it, isn't it? It's just taking that moment. Is that a big part of your message when you do your speaking? And
the taking a moment to slow down and to figure out where it's coming from? Yes, to a certain extent. I mean, insofar as I put self-awareness or developing self-awareness as the foundation to any kind of change somebody wants to make. I was speaking about resilience yesterday to a group of HR practitioners, because as you know, in that field, especially in the last year, your job is to support other people and to help them pull from their own resilience so that the corporate structure, the corporation, can be resilient and manage crises. But then the person providing those services, they rarely stop to apply to themselves the things that they need. And in talking about resilience and developing resilience, I started with the most important thing is self-awareness. If you do not realize that there's a problem, you cannot fix it, right? And
Mm.
that is true with wanting to change internal bias, with wanting to build self-resilience, with wanting to manage one's anxiety or depression, with wanting to change a culture within an organization or a company or a firm, right? It starts with slowing down, understanding what's going on, to your point, looking at where that's coming from, right? Um, and a lot of times people stop there because those are aha moments and they feel good, they're gratifying.
Mm.
For me, the next really big piece is do something with that.
Mm.
So now that I have this awareness, what am I going to do differently? Who am I going to practice it with? When we talk about these changes we want to make, very often I will recommend that one starts with identifying one person, one small situation. Instead of saying globally, I had less bias. Globally, I wish that when women and men showed up and spoke up, I acknowledged their expertise fairly, instead of what we all have as a bias is a tendency to look at men and assume that they know more, right? We tend to question women more. I might sit and say, who is one woman with whom I feel like I do this? And I can just start with focusing on my relationship to her,
Mm.
changing that bias in that relationship, and then you can spread it. Same thing with resilience, and self-awareness. What is one way in which I'm potentially undermining my own ability to build resilience? Resilience is not a thing, it's psychological stamina. So just like your endurance when you run is not a skill, it's something you develop by practicing certain habits and skills. Resilience is the same thing.
Mm.
We each have the capacity to create those changes by focusing on micro moments or opportunities for change.
Yeah, no, that's really powerful, because it does feel, we've all got stuff to work on. We all have, and I think that's really, that kind of gave me quite an internal, the moment of looking at someone, what relationship, who is it you are prejudging, and really examining that, and I'm taking the action to do something different, isn't it? That's really, it's not comfortable, is it? Because we're actually having to dig really deep into our core values, and that takes work, and it takes a lot of recognition, and also, sadly, it takes a moment to say, well, actually, that's less than ideal. That's not good. That needs to change. And we don't really like doing that to ourselves, do we?
No, I don't think most of us I don't think. See, this is the thing that we do. I think. I know.
Even you do it.
I do it all the time. I try to catch it. These micro moments, right? This is something that I do in order to change that pattern. When I catch myself doing it, if I can, I correct it. I know that as humans, we tend to believe we're very self-aware, and we like to think of ourselves as morally upstanding. I have my youngest son is a huge World War II enthusiast. His knowledge is encyclopedic and a little obsessive at this point. But when we're talking about, we like to ask him to focus on different things. He loves to focus on the armament and the weaponry and all of those things. And we're trying to help him focus on the history and how something like that could unfold. But he's 9, so maybe he'll get there a little later. But one of the things that we're talking about is how in wars and in battles, both sides feel very righteous. Right? Both sides are very certain that what they're doing is the right thing and that the other person is evil. And we carry that internally as individuals. We believe that we are good people and we do good things. So when we're confronted with proof or evidence that the things we're doing, the way we're approaching or appearing in the world, might actually not be quite as good, quite as righteous, quite as in line with who we think we are, that dissonance is very difficult to deal with. And most people, including people like me who are psychologists who pay attention to this stuff all the time, we shut down, we justify. And when we set those walls up, we don't take the steps we need to create change. And when I look at, bringing women into leadership, especially, And we talk about, or I talk about at least, the importance of it being a joint effort. Women cannot be the only ones responsible for opening the doors and the opportunities and breaking the glass ceilings and removing the glass cliffs, for women to access leadership and for it to be so commonplace that it is not noteworthy anymore. In order to bring men in, we have to be able to have this conversation with them that doesn't put them in a position where we are so highlighting what's wrong that they put up walls and they can't listen. Right? And it's not because they're bad people. It's because that's the way the human brain works.
Yeah, I think that's a really major part of why we have such inequality, is because, and I put my own hands up to this. I was that person that would prejudge, just like, they're just all the same, and it just starts that really bad energy, and you start from a really negative place, and that's never going to be good. That's always going to struggle. I just want to come back to one thing you said about the looking at yourselves and recognizing. I think there's and I interviewed someone last night actually about emotions and about denial of depression, and how we get out of depression, things like that. And her name's Maria Adriana Contreras, and she had a lovely simple way of saying, we're not meant to be perfect. It's fine to be flawed. It's okay, and it was just, she had a beautiful, simple way of putting it, because part of the issue, I feel, is culturally is ingrained in us that we're supposed to be like amazing. We're supposed to be really great. We hold ourselves to kind of on a podium of perfection. We recognize we're not perfect, but the fact that when we start recognizing those imperfections and where we're going wrong, we then start feeling bad about ourselves, and that's where it goes wrong, isn't it? It feels like that's just actually, no, we're just human, and we are trained and we're programmed. We don't have to take ourselves into, the whole thrashing ourselves with. A lot of it has a terrible religious connotation to it in my belief system, that it's hit yourself over the head with something or another. Now that's sinful to feel like that. But
Right.
it's just human. It's fine.
I absolutely agree, right? That it is that what we're really struggling with is, theoretically, intellectually, we all recognize that perfection is impossible. Perfection is impossible. The idea that something is absolutely flawless, because I would say that even the most quote unquote flawless diamond has flaws if somebody looks close enough, right? So intellectually, we recognize it. We're even forgiving of imperfection in others. The problem is our emotional beings don't align with what we know to be true intellectually. So we have what I like to call these yes buts in our head. Well, yes, of course, everybody's imperfect, but I should have been able to do this. I should be able, speaking about depression, like I should be able to handle this. I should have it all together. And then the other piece that adds on to that is it's a combination of two thinking disorders, right? Distortions, not disorders, distortions. One is personalizing and the other one is overgeneralizing. So telling oneself that because one makes a mistake or is imperfect, right, has an imperfection, that they are now flawed, imperfect, and failures. So I personalize, I make this about me, and then I overgeneralize. This small issue means that I globally am, right? This one flaw negates now everything else that I hold to be true about myself.
Yeah.
You and I, before talking, we before going on air, I should say, we're talking about imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Right. And this is what ties in. It's what I like to call the Wonder Woman filter for women, the belief that one should be everything to everyone at all times. And a lot of women, especially ambitious women, are walking around with that as the assumption that that is the key to being valued, that that is the key to being recognized, that that is what is necessary for success. And so when you get to a place where suddenly you can't be everything to everyone at all time because you can't hold all the knowledge because you don't have all the answers, it becomes terrifying. And we burn out anyhow. That's if we even get there, because most of us will burn out beforehand and just trying to meet the needs and the assumed needs, and expectations of others.
Yeah.
And that assumed piece is really important because oftentimes it's assumed. It's not something that others are telling us we need to jump to.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And then therefore we kick in and think, oh, we're not capable of doing this. We're not good enough to do this. And then therefore we shouldn't be doing this. We're an imposter. This is not really where I should be. It's a really slippery, a very fast, horrible slippery slope downwards, isn't it? When you allow yourself to go down. So what would you say? I know you've got so much that you can talk about this, but what would you say is the key element that women can really tune into? Because we have on the Women in the Show had an imposter syndrome coach who was amazing, but love to hear your kind of best tip for this kind of thing for women, coming from your psychology background and experience of working with so many women.
Well, I'll share with you what I do, which is based on how I've been trained, and what therefore I teach other people, because I'll admit to I have it. Right? I need to catch it all the time. The first thing is to get really thinking about self-awareness, to get really good at recognizing what it feels like to be uncomfortable. Right? To recognize what distress looks like in different situations. Distress will look differently. So for a lot of us with imposter syndrome, what distress will look like is it will manifest as us trying to get all the answers and figure things out, and to feel very harried and the need to rush and that stress mounting up. So figuring out how our discomfort, how that imposter syndrome actually manifests, gives us the opportunity to catch it when it's there. The second thing is labeling it. Right? We've all heard of this. We know it. We know it's ridiculous intellectually. Again, putting a label to it helps. It helps the brain start to disengage. Oh, this is imposter syndrome. This is this thing where, using my words, I think that I need to be everything to everyone at all times. I assume that I need to have all the answers. I am telling myself I am God. Right? I'm not even a religious person, but I'm telling myself I'm a deity of some kind, that somehow I can be omniscient. I can know everything. And if you can ingest that little bit of humor, inject that little bit of humor into it, and reminding yourself that that is really the premise. I am perfect. That's what I'm telling myself, because I should be able to know everything. And then breathe to disengage that fight or flight response and ask yourself, what is it that I need to know? And how courageous am I going to be in reaching out to somebody to fill that gap? That's when it's there. So when you're already in that position of authority or leadership or power and you're seeing it kick in, what I'm trying to do with the women I'm working with is actually avoid getting them in that situation. And we do that beforehand by setting them up when they're interviewing for promotions or new positions to be very clear and articulate what their actual value is, what they're really good at, but also get them to a place where they can articulate what they're not good at. So that there's full transparency, so that then when they step into these opportunities, they know that the people who hired them or chose them for those opportunities realize where to best use their value, where they're going to need help and support. And so we haven't created this false assumption of perfection. And that, I mean, if you can do it, if you listening are in a position where you're about to apply for a promotion or a new job, please, 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 that is where you start to undermine imposter syndrome. Be honest about what your relative weaknesses or areas of growth are and what your strengths are, and make sure both things get articulated in the interview, because that way you will not feel like you have to show up as anything more than yourself. And there's an honesty and authenticity in that interview process that allows you to make sure that you're the right person for them and that they're right for you.
Oh, that's really powerful. And that's like the antithesis to how the traditional interview process has been. That's like, that is the chalk to the cheese. but why not? Why not? And vulnerability is something we all need to do more of. We all need to use that muscle more of us within ourselves, I think. And that's what you're doing then. You're saying, well, look, I'm just human. I know I'm not so great at this, I'm not so great at that. But I can deliver on X, Y, Z. That's a really brilliant tip. I hope someone is watching this that's going for a job, because I definitely am not, because I don't think I'm employable anymore.
Me too, but really I start with, listen, I am amazing at the following things, right? So it's also developing the courage to recognize what you're really good at. And this is what the impact is, and this is what the value. Now, I see this job requires these things, or my assumption is this is part of it, and I want to be honest with you, I'm going to need support, help, or whatever. Or I'm really good at these things, but I hate doing them. So you don't want to hire somebody to do something they hate. It creates disengagement. It's going to lead to turnover. They will leave you over time. So I need support. I need somebody else on my team. Who else on my team can step in and focus on these things so that I can bring the value I really have? There is a true realistic conversation to have with potential employers and leaders that will get you hired. Like, I have not done this with anybody and ever place them in a position where they come back and they say, I lost the job. I can't believe you made me do this. I lost the job.
Yeah. And you're also setting a standard for yourself, because I've worked in so many. I mean, it's all it's in the hundreds businesses and varying degrees, private, public sector. And it's always the bosses that came to me on their first day and said, okay, here I am. I am here to do this. I'm going to be amazing. But I can distinctly remember, as you were talking there, I can distinctly remember, like when I was a police officer, I remember a sergeant joining. He said, I am absolutely wetting myself. I am phenomenally good at speaking on a one-to-one basis. I'm really great at solving problems on a bigger picture, but actually put me in conflict, and I do struggle a bit because I'm a softie. And this guy was 6'6", double the size and width of me. And I thought, wow. And I just totally respected him from that moment on. So you have owned your space. You've given your complete vulnerability to sharing what you're not so great at. So whenever there was quite a violent incident, we knew that then, and we would, not shield him. He's a sergeant, but how refreshing, especially in that kind of environment, for a guy. So it's always modeling as well, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, and in any organization, it's about making sure that you are using the value and the assets that your people bring in, like, optimally. So if I know exactly what everybody on my team is fantastic at, and I know what their weaknesses are, but I also know what they don't like doing, my ability to delegate tasks much more effectively, much more efficiently goes up, which means that as a team, we're going to function better, but morale. When you get to walk into work doing the things that you love and are good at, not just doing the things you're good at, some of which you hate, some of which make you never want to get out of bed in the morning, you're much more likely to show up, to be effective, to be impactful, to be powerful, to want to stay at a company, to feel invested in it. It's just good business. I mean, whether we're talking about corporate, nonprofit, public sector, politics, it's just good business.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually making more of an enriched environment, because everyone is then playing on their skills. And so you've got a lovely positivity. It's the ideal scenario, isn't it? And it's what we should. How many times have we heard women say, oh, I didn't want to mention that I couldn't do that, or the angst that women and men go through when they know they can't do something, but they don't want to put their hand up and say, I can't actually do this, or I know I'm not very good at this. And I'm personally talking from personal experience again. I remember taking on a job and it's like, oh my God, this is so not my bag. But instead of admitting, yeah, that's a really great point. We have sadly come to the end of the show. And I do say really sadly, because I could talk to you for hours. I love talking about these subjects, and it all comes down to self-esteem, because when we can be truly connected with who we are, and from the outset, like you say, at the interview time, then aren't we going to feel better?
It's always a pleasure, a delight. Delight is the right word. It is truly a delight to sit and speak with somebody who's just as passionate about the changes we want to make and the world we're trying to create, and is open to having a variety of conversations on how that's done, because this is just one approach. So it's exciting. It's what makes watching the show, or being on it in this case, really worthwhile and fun.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Alessandra Wall, coming to us and tuning in at a very early time for you. But I really appreciate it. And it's a shame that my other co-hosts couldn't be here today, Jo Sumner and Kim Platts, but I've actually had a wonderful time talking to you all by myself. So thank you for sharing all your wonderful knowledge. What's the best place for people to get in touch with you, Alessandra?
Actually, the most central place is to go on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, Dr. Alessandra Wall, 1 L, 2 S's, although for all my European people, that's an easy thing to remember. That's for my American crowd, 1 L, 2 S's. And my contact information on the contact tab is up to date. It is the most central place right now, better even than my website, to get in touch with me.
Yeah, fantastic. And please get in touch if you would be like to consider for the Women Leading book number 2, which is going to be coming out this year. And there are also, obviously, you can buy the books on Amazon, the Women Leading book, either in Kindle or on paperback, and join our Facebook page. So in our Facebook group, we are talking about these issues. All the shows get posted into there. And we'd love you to be part of this conversation, men and women. This is a conversation and a movement towards us all leading better. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and have a great day. Take care for now. Goodbye.
Bye.